going to read the next chapter, chapter 4 from the Surrender Experiment, A Journey into Life's Perfection. So chapter 4 is absolute silence. So if you remember, he went camping. He went camping with his family and friends and went to go meditate under a tree and said, I'm not going to get up until I've reached enlightenment. And so this is what happened. I crossed my legs in a full lotus position. I knew I wasn't proficient enough to hold that posture for long, but I thought I might as well start with the official meditation position. I straightened my back and neck, and I began to concentrate on my breath, expanding and contracting in my abdomen. The Zen book instructed me to make the mu sound way down in my belly, below the belly button. I watched my breath go in and out from way down there. I was intending to sit for much longer than I had done previously, so I used my will to concentrate with extra intensity and sincerity. I must have made a difference because I went deeper inside than I had ever gone before. It seemed that concentrating on the movement of the breath in my belly created a force that linked the outflow of breath from my nostrils with the inner movement of my abdomen. Every time I breathed slowly out of my nose, I felt a warm, inviting sensation throughout the area below my belly. The sensation was so nice that my attention naturally centered there. For a period of time, I simply lost myself in the beauty of that experience. Sometime later, the length of which I have no way of telling, the mental voice began talking about how beautiful the experience was and how this must be real meditation. Since my awareness was drawn to that mental voice, it was drawn away from concentrating on the breath. The meditation experience seemed to have run its natural course, and I began to come down to my normal mental state. But this meditation session was supposed to be different. I had told myself I wasn't getting up until I had broken through. So I willfully began concentrating anew on the movement of the breath in my belly and on the sound of mu. I lost myself once again in the warm flowing force that tied my exhalations to the warmth of my abdomen. The force became much stronger as I concentrated more deeply. Eventually, all consciousness of my body and my surroundings was gone. I was only aware of the effortless flow of warm energy that was building and expanding at the core of my belly. I was not there, only the flow was there. From time to time, for brief moments, my sense of self-awareness would drift back into focus. The instant that started to happen, I would willfully focus on the feeling of the exhaled breath and movement of my belly, and instantly I was no longer there. This experience of drifting in and out of the deep state went on for a prolonged period of time, perhaps even hours. At some point, I must have lost the will to refocus during one of those moments when self-awareness returned. I had been far gone in a very deep and peaceful place, but I started to come back. I don't know how long I actually had been sitting, but the first thing I became aware of was the pain in my legs. They hurt a great deal from sitting in the full lotus position for so long. The voice of the mind had not started back up yet. I was just there, kind of dazed, but very peaceful and deeply mesmerized by the experience. I suppose I would have continued to come down, but an amazing thing happened. From back behind, where my sense of awareness had been centering, came a booming voice. It said very sternly, "Do you or do you not want to know what is beyond you?" This was not the voice of my mind I was so used to struggling with. Ever since I first noticed that chattering voice, it was talking in front of and below where I sat inside. This new invocation came from behind and above my sense of awareness was now situated. In any event, its stern challenge shook me to the depths of my being. I didn't feel the need to answer the question because every drop of me yearned to go deeper. So I took a deep breath and pushed myself into the out-breath and was gone again. When my sense of self-awareness began to coagulate again, my experience of being was very different from anything I had ever experienced before. I felt pain in my legs, but they were very far away, and the pain had a warmth and a beauty to it. As I regained some awareness of my body, I tried to lean my head a tiny bit forward, but nothing moved. It was as though my forehead was pressed against a wall. Something very solid was resisting even the slightest movement of my head forward. I immediately realized that the sheer intensity of my concentration had created a well-defined force that flowed outward from my forehead and curved back to the point of my lower abdomen, where I had been concentrating. I know this must sound strange, but it felt like a magnetic field that was so strong I simply could not move against it. This was not the only powerful energy that I was experiencing. I had been sitting in a full lotus posture with my hands resting on my crossed feet. In that position, the whole of my hands, arms, and shoulders formed a closed circle. Now that complete circle had become another one of those force fields. I could neither move forward nor sideways. I was locked in what I can only describe as a perpendicular energy flows, like this and like this. Whenever I breathed out, the flow became more tangible and intense. The entire experience was so completely enthralling that I did not actually regain awareness of my surroundings. I only came down far enough to see that my body was overcome by those energy flows. Then once again I heard, "Do you or do you not want to know what is beyond you?" I immediately took a deep breath in and with great intention slowly exhaled through my nostrils. It was as though the outgoing breath pushed against the magnetic force fields, creating an upward lift. That upward and inward propulsion began to drive me to an even deeper place, beyond any sense of self-awareness. One more breath in and out, and I was completely gone. Perhaps you would like to ask where I went. That's reasonable, but I'm unable to answer that question. I only know that each time I came back, I was in a more elevated state than when I left. When I came back from nowhere the next time, everything was very different. There was no subtle resistance to having returned. There was no sense of urgency to hold on to the elevated state. There was only peace. Deep, deep peace. And there was absolute silence. A silence that nothing could possibly disturb. It was so still that perhaps there had never ever been any sound here for all of eternity. It was like outer space where there is no atmosphere, so there can be no sound. Sound requires a medium in which to travel. In the place I returned to, there was no such medium. I was truly experiencing the sound of silence. Most important, there was no voice. There was not even the memory of what it would be like to have chatter in that sacred space. It was gone, all gone. All that was left was awareness of being. I simply existed, nothing more. This time, no stern beckoning entreated me to go beyond. It was time to come back. The first thing I noticed as I became aware of my surroundings was that the external energy flows I experienced earlier had drawn inward. I now felt a very beautiful flow of energy at my spine to the middle of my forehead. I had never experienced this before, and almost all my awareness was drawn to that point. Meanwhile, there still was great pain in my legs, but it wasn't a problem. It was just the quiet experience of pain. No complaints, no mental dialogue about what to do about it. There was simply awareness, completely at peace with what it was. I was completely at peace with what it was aware of. I managed to move my arms enough to unfold my legs from the lotus position. They were like dead weights. So I laid on my side for a while until they came back to life. It was so peaceful and so comfortable lying there. In time, I opened my eyes. What eased in through those openings was like nothing I had ever seen or dreamed of before. The wetland area before me appeared like a Japanese rice paper painting. It exuded gentleness and stillness. The tall grasses swayed in the gentle breeze, and their movements had a stillness about it. Everything was so quiet and so serene. The trees were quiet, the clouds were quiet, the water was quiet. There was absolute stillness in the midst of the movement of nature. My body was quiet, and there was no thoughts at all. I could have lain there forever, melting into the peace that surrounded my sense of presence. But when I finally did get up, the movement of my body was unfamiliar to me. I had never been a graceful person. I was definitely not the dancing type, but now every movement of my body was like a ballet. There was a graceful flow when my arms moved, and I really saw the difference when I began to walk. With each step, I could feel every tiny movement of the muscles of my feet. I flowed from one step into the next, and the movement itself was intoxicating. The amazing part is that this state lasted for weeks. When I rejoined my friends that day, the state didn't change. I felt no need to explain or describe what happened to me during the 2 or 3 hours that I was gone, because I could hardly talk. Everything was just so beautiful and tranquil. The silence, the absolute silence, even sounds outside did not disturb my inner stillness. The sounds were out there, but they seemed so far away from where I was seated inside myself. The moat of thick peace allowed nothing to reach the citadel of this elevated state. That's the end of the chapter.